I'm Dapper Dan Gavosden. I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely count, at least for now, because I put a Twitter poll up asking whether or not people think that they count, and it seems 50-50 at the moment, so I'm holding on.
Well, Dan, we have a lot of bots who follow us, and I have to imagine the bots are going to take your side because it's such a pathetic point of view that obviously bots will vote for it. But we'll see what happens in a few hours, or by the time this episode comes out. Which, by the way, I'm Mischievous Mark Chinacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely do not count, regardless of what any poll says.
Are you suggesting like the Kravenoff bots from Russia are they're pro annual?
The bots are very like chameleon-esque, I feel like. They're just copies of copies of copies, and they're all soulless and very sad, and they probably make copies of the Stacy twins just to really mess with us. That's my thought. To vote for.
This is what Nick Spencer was getting at, is that the chameleons are just Russian bots, like this underground network that will probably never be seen again in a Spider-Man comic.
And for Nick Spencer's final trick, they're voting against the existence or the non-existence of annuals. So there you go.
Well, you know what? Then align me with Nick Spencer and his goals. So welcome everybody to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, if you think our last conversation was fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for a review episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, if you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app. Every other week, we put out a mainline episode of our flagship show, and sprinkled in between, we review new comics as well as interview some of the greatest Spider-Man creators of yesterday and today. This is the perfect time to start listening and being a bot.
Yeah, as much as it is the perfect time to start listening at the kickoff of an event and our coverage of that event, if you want to go back and listen to some of our amazing content that we've done prior to this, go check out our other feed, Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues. You never know. It's like when you dig through a back issues bin, it may be $1, but that doesn't mean that you might not find some gold in there. And I think some of our earliest episodes are pure gold, and that's an Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues feed on Apple Podcasts. But like I said, we're going to be talking about a review episode on this show. So today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Dark Web Dusk #1, the kickoff to this year's Spider event, Dark Web. This issue was written by Zeb Wells. The issue's cover and interior artwork are by Adam Kubert, plus colors by Frank Martin, and of course letters by VC's Joe Caramagna. This issue was first released on December 7th in the year of our Lord Hobgoblin 2022. Mark, why don't you give us a summary of Dark Web Dusk #1?
Sounds good, Dan. Well, we open with Ben and Janine, who are holiday shopping. Ben is looking in the windows and sees an official Red Ryder carbine action 200-shot range model air rifle with a compass in the stock and a thing that tells time. And Peter and MJ show up, and they're all like, "You'll shoot your eye out, Ben. Also, Ben, you're not real, and you're as bald as Lex Luthor under your blonde hair." In reality, Ben is being confronted with his darkest fears by Madeline Pryor because, of course, this mega crossover is going to continue with Madeline Pryor in it. Ben says if pain is energy, he is full of it. And James Hetfield is like, "Sick lyric, brah." Flash over to the Coffee Bean. And Peter and the gang are celebrating the late Harry Osborn's birthday. Still no comment about Flash being able to celebrate the late Harry Osborn's birthday. But Harry is dead, for real, absolutely 100% dead. Peter and MJ have called a ceasefire, while Paul cares for the kids. Long story. Well, not because it's actually a long story, but because Nick Lowe has some more comics to sell, kids. Norman Osborn is all sad and forlorn, so Peter goes out to comfort him, and they reminisce about all the times Norman tried to ruin his life. including the time he orchestrated the Clone Saga and robbed everyone who was alive at the time about 2 years of their lives that they'll never get back. When Norman goes after Peter, it hurts all of us. Back to Madeline and Chasm, and apparently the original Venom. Eddie Brock, he's joined the battle in exchange for finding his son. Meanwhile, the X-Men are enjoying Christmas in New York, and I'm hoping this is just a couple of pages of interlude. But wait, we're back to Madeline casting spells and unleashing demons in New York City. Peter suits up into action and is reminded why he never goes to Rockefeller Center around Christmas. Bazinga. The X-Men keep fighting demons on their own end, and Madeline and Eve sick Eddie out after Spider-Man, while Ben and Chasm show up at Norman's door looking for some revenge. Ben gets the jump on Norman, who summons the Gold Goblin attire until Ben reveals that he once posed as Peter and sabotaged Norman's Goblin gear before punching his lights out. Close out with Venom swinging into action, looking to eat some Spider-Man brains.
Whoa, this is a packed issue. I mean, what was this, a $4.99 book? So you'd hope it'd be packed with story. I think we were a bit mixed on the previous issue that kind of gave the prelude to Dark Web, and this is kind of maybe more prelude to Dark Web, although it does kick off a number of events here. I won't get into how the whole thing is structured, although it's been advertised that if we want to get Spider-Man story, we can pick up this issue and the Dark Web Dawn issue and the Spider-Man stories in between and kind of get the full thing. And I figure we could start off this discussion with our overall thoughts, but echoing what I was just saying is I actually thought, for a story that leans heavily into the world of the X-Men, I was really pleased by how much this stuck to Spider-Man, his world, and the events that we've been following for all of the Zeb Wells run. Do I think it needed to be tied in with Inferno and all that stuff? No, but I don't mind it if the issues are going to be of this quality and sticking this close to what we've been reading thus far.
Yeah, I mean, I see that. I think if I was going to be super particular, I might have suggested like you said, we kind of got this is a prelude, but then the last Amazing Spider-Man issue was a prelude, and given that this comic actually feels more entrenched in Spider-Man's world than the last one, which was more focused on Ben and Janine, I almost wonder from a chronology standpoint if it would have made more sense to kind of flip-flop it and have that been the Dark Web #1, and then this kind of kicking off the ASM story, but whatever. I'm not a Marvel editor. Apparently you have to be super qualified to be that.
No, that's a really great point, actually. I think that previous issue would have been a much better Dark Web story in that it's really much more Madeline and Chasm related than this one, which, I mean, this one's not a very Peter-heavy story either, but it feels much more focused on the world of Amazing Spider-Man than that issue.
Yeah. Well, you have all the the Norman Osborn stuff and the Harry Osborn stuff, and you actually have a direct confrontation with Peter and Ben, which I bringing Venom into it. I don't know, it felt very entrenched, much more entrenched in the world of Spider-Man certainly than the last issue did. I kind of, in terms of overall thoughts, Dan, I have very similar thoughts to what I had to the last issue of Amazing Spider-Man, which was that, on a technical level, I don't know if I have any true problems with this comic, but I as someone who is not terribly invested in this story after that issue of ASM, I don't know if this brings me in anymore. I mean, I feel like the best parts of it were the parts that were the most entrenched in Peter's world, and they were kind of just used as not window dressing, but they weren't essential to the plot. It was just kind of, I think, little breadcrumbs being thrown by Zeb Wells to let the readers know, hey, I still have a larger plot I'm doing here, and I will get back to it at some point. But this Ben Peter thing and all of Ben's motivations and Madeline Pryor's motivations. I just don't care, Dan. It's very hard for me to care about this right now.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I am way less interested in the Inferno stuff and whatever's going on between Ben and Madeline, and I'm much more interested in the dynamics of Ben's return. Right. And I'm not sure that we needed to make this a bigger event story. You know, I think maybe it would have been too similar to the Hobgoblin story, but if, like, thematically we're just doing these kind of, like, the sins of Norman come back to haunt him thing, and you have Ben returning with some way, like, just out to get revenge on, like, he's feeling all this pain and he needs to lash out, and it comes in the form of attacking Norman. You know, maybe that's too much of a repeat of what we got with the Hobgoblin, although that story seemed to be much more like about like Machiavellian interest than like just a pure and outright like revenge tale. So you know, I wish we got that story. You know, what I will praise this for is that, like, I was dreading the story for so long because of the Inferno stuff, but at least in this issue, it didn't detract for me from the kind of emotional tale that we were getting with Ben. Like, him confronting Norman, none of that has anything to do with Inferno. Like, the bit with Norman at the coffee bean, none of that has anything to do with Inferno. And that stuff all worked for me. If I have to read Spider-Man dodging living books in the meantime, you know, fine. Like, I'm okay with that. Like, it's a weird context for this story, but the emotional elements of those kinds of, like, you know, character beats worked, and that's what I care about at the end of the day. And also, I thought, like, tone and style-wise, like, I like this kind of, like, as like a like tone setter, like the direct homage back to Inferno at the beginning of this issue with, like, Madeline or with Ben and Peter pulling off his lips and stuff like that, like, really cool and very dark, edgy 90s stuff. And if this is going to be a book that very clearly is aiming at replicating the 90s and, like, Ben's kind of origin, okay, fine. Like, I'll go with it. I don't love it, but, like, I'm not going to, like, outright reject this in the way that I thought I would entering into this event.
Right. And I agree with that to a point. I mean, I guess what I would say to all that is, like, you know, I mean, you talk about what worked for you and how that was unrelated to Inferno, and I agree with that. And I would just, like, kind of challenge, you know, Marvel's editorial office to be like, well, like, I feel like the conflict and the drama is there, and we're overcomplicating it by bringing in Inferno and X-Men to the point where, you know, I find it uninteresting, frankly. It's like, what could have been the setup for this story? Like Ben Reilly finds out that Peter, you know, is aligned with Norman, and Norman is the person who turned him into a glob of glue in, you know, glob of goo in Spider-Man 75 back in the 90s. Gabagoo, you know, gabagoo and a gabagine. But, you know, like I feel like that's all the drama and setup you need. Like
100%.
It's like keep it simple, and like doing all this nonsense with Madeline Pryor and the X-Men and Miss Marvel and Venom, who we'll talk about this when we talk about ASM in our next episode. But oh my God, bringing that back, Eddie Brock's Venom and it's all its early 90s glory, and it's like, it's painful. It's like, why are we bringing this down with all of this excess when there is a perfectly viable story already at the heart of this thing right now? And we're kind of like, I don't want to say we're glossing over it, because it does play a crucial role in this issue, but it still feels less centered around it than it should be. That's my biggest point.
I mean, it's funny. I think a lot of my positivity, and it's hard to talk about this comic without talking about Amazing Spider-Man 15, which, since we're recording this a little later than we might normal because they put these back to back,
Right.
And Mark and I normally record every 2 weeks just to get a little behind the scenes here.
Yeah. I also had the plague last week, so you didn't want me recording last week.
Right,
so
right.
Yeah.
And it's hard not to like praise this in contrast to that, because like one of the things that I feared about this issue would be like these kind of like more kind of line wide books, or the event books, like the Dark Web, or let's say like the Civil War. They often get really damaged by having to set up the B titles that spin out of it. And I don't feel like this one really cared about that at all. Like, it really was Spider-Man focused. Whereas, and we'll get into it in ASM 15, that book felt the exact opposite. Like, and it's just weird to see these kind of structural elements playing out that way. Now, to you saying overcomplicating things, let's get into talking about Ben Reilly, or Chasm himself, and his motives and characterization, because like I'm kind of enjoying how lame he's being written here, like whatever, like grimdom, as Alan Scherstl would call it, and it's kind of in keeping with the 90s style of this book. But I'm with you on this, Mark, which is like his motivations are so overcomplicated and all over the place. Like, instead of it just being a clean thing, like he's going after Peter and Norman, he's attacking New York with an army of demons. He's sneaking into the X-Men mansion. He's lobotomizing Venom. He's going after Spider-Man, getting revenge on Norman Osborn. It's like 20 different directions, to the point that I don't even feel like I understand this character. Like, even after like ASM 14, which I thought, okay, a bit of a silly title, but a clean motivational arc. He's going after Spider-Man. He wants him to eat the fruit. Even the Norman thing seems like a deviation that I'm willing to accept. But like, I'm so confused about Ben and what he wants and why he needs to involve himself in all of this. I assume you feel very, very similar.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, it's just like you said, like we're yet to see a through line here. I mean, like, frankly, his whole motivation, going back to the prelude in ASM, like, it wasn't entirely clear. But it's like, okay, he's upset with Peter. He feels that Peter stole his life. Okay, fine. Like we'll go with it. You know what I mean? We'll do a yes and there. But it's like, again, like what I have learned over the course of the last 14 or 15 issues of Amazing Spider-Man is, and maybe to the chagrin of some, the central conflict of this story seems to be like, what is the deal that Peter made with Norman Osborn? And that is where the most drama and intrigue and interest for me has lied over the last, what has it been, like 8-9 months of this story. So why, like, let's just play exclusively in that sandbox. If we want to bring Ben back, let's play in that sandbox with Ben. Like, what it, like, it can just be a simpler motivation, and in doing this, it kind of, like, yeah, it's kind of fun in like the grim dumb consistency of it. like okay, like they're going for it, but like there's a better story to be told in just being very straightforward about it. And it's like, why are we taking, it's not even the scenic route there. It's like, it's, like, I feel like we're going in the wrong direction, but we'll still end up at the destination at some point. But like, I don't know, like it's just frustrating. That's all. It's frustrating. Just give me Ben, sneak attacking Norman Osborn, sabotaging his equipment, and then drawing Peter there to fight him. Like that worked. Like that was the best stuff for the whole of the last of this issue, and the one that we're going to talk about in a few hours. So there you go.
Yeah, and I do really want to talk about those two scenes with you, because I agree with you. I think they were the highlights of this issue. I'm speaking of the coffee bean scene and the scene in Oscorp. But before we get there, Mark, let's talk about the Slack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on the Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you could jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more. Dan, I bet you, in addition to Twitter, you could put some pretty awesome polls in the Slack, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can. There's a thing called Simple Poll, and so people do polls all the time in our Slack. And, I actually wanted to highlight, you said hundreds of listeners. Actually, this week, we passed over 400 listeners who've joined us in the Slack. So it's a pretty large community at this point. And I think especially with the kind of demise of Twitter, being such that I guess today there's a poll out whether or not Elon Musk should remain the head of Twitter, which I don't think is being offered in good faith, and journalists being banned, and now links to other social media. I mean, it doesn't take like Sherlock Holmes to identify that Twitter seems to be a Zeppelin on fire getting ready to crash into the side of a mountain. But our Slack is remaining good, and everybody's joining and being welcomed. And yeah, if you just want to come in and talk about Spider-Man or comics or nerd stuff in general, like this week, everybody's been talking about the kind of what seems to be the reboot of DC films and all the craziness going on there. So, the only way I can keep up with all that is the Slack. Those guys keep me straight. I'm like caring for my newborn son, and they're telling me about, Henry Cavill getting booted and all this stuff. So anyway, if you want to join our awesome Spider-Man and comics community, just follow the link in the description to this episode, and it will take you right to the Slack. You can sign up. You know what's the best thing about it, Mark? I was thinking today is like the big fear of going to a new social platform with the demise of Twitter is like, I don't want to have to regain all of those people following me again and find out who's on what platform. It's splintered in every which direction. And yes, the Slack is like a splinter as well, but it's not a social media platform. Like you don't have to get people to follow you and convince them that you're worth hanging out with. It's just a place to be. And I find that kind of like really stress relieving about this whole like fracturing of the internet space. So anyway, it's like our own personal coffee bean, which is a perfect segue to our next conversation, Mark, where we're going to talk about this scene at the coffee bean. Tell me what you thought about this, because to me, this was kind of like the emotional highlight of this issue.
Oh, yeah. I mean, all kidding aside in my summary about like seeing Flash Thompson at the coffee bean talking about Harry, the deceased Harry. Well, it's like, weren't you dead like 2 weeks ago in this world? I don't know, but whatever. It's just good to see, like, this is the kind of emotional resonance that we've been getting in these books consistently on this run for the last few months, and it certainly continued here. I mean, like we kind of like, it's definitely a bit of a who's who the way ASM 900 was, in terms of like, wait, let me count all the different people who are here and how they're connected. It was like Carly Cooper is here, and it's like, why are Peter and MJ here? Okay, they've had a ceasefire. Okay, I mean, like we're definitely like checking some boxes and like having some good authentic moments, and like, like I don't know ultimately where this is all going with Norman Osborn, but like kind of seeing his little like shadowy self outside the coffee bean looking forlorn, it was heartbreaking. Like they're really trying to make you feel for this character, whether you want to feel for this sociopathic murderer. That's, your mileage may vary, but they're working hard and the art's paying it off. So it was a very emotionally complex and satisfying scene. It was very good.
And it reminds me like him kind of outside of it. For some reason, it takes me back to the like the Ditko days of like the Spider-Man fan club meeting, as like depicted both there and in Spider-Man Blue, of the kind of snowy evening of Norman outside of the party and then attacking it as the Green Goblin. I can't imagine it was an intentional contrast to that, but that's where my brain went, is just like, okay, like this is an interesting new context for Norman on the outs from everybody, to see him out there. And, like this is the kind of approach to addressing what I would consider bad story choices that I wish that someone like Nick Spencer would have kind of adopted. And I thought like it was kind of his MO when we talked about his first issue of Amazing Spider-Man, kind of picking up the baton from Slott and fixing a lot of the problems that we had in a very simple and elegant and quick way. Like, okay, like, of course Peter would be morally caught up in a problem with Doc Ock stealing, material, and would lose his doctorship. And, like there were so many things that he did in that first issue that we really praised before he would go on to belabor solving other things for his entire run. And here,
Right.
Like I really don't like the decision to kill off Harry Osborn in the way that he was, I guess, like as a clone getting killed off again. And
Right.
there's certainly some confusion amongst the people here. And Norman even acknowledges as much, like he was a clone. I don't know how to feel about that. Like, but it's nice to see that like Harry's death meant something to these characters. It may not make any sense at all, as you alluded to with the whole Flash Thompson of it all, but like acknowledge it meant something, be specific about what it meant, which is they know he was a clone, or at least Peter and Norman acknowledge that he was a clone, and it's complicated, and let's move on from it while acknowledging that like it would actually mean something emotionally to these people. And then, drawing an elegant like parallel that then leads into the later part of his book, that both of them had a clone die in their arms, vis-a-vis some Norman related thing.
Right.
I thought was really interesting. So, I'm with you. What would you make of this whole ceasefire between like Peter and MJ in the context of what did Peter do, and like bringing Carly into it and asking about Paul, which suggests, I guess, people don't really universally understand like what it is that happened here. Did it provide you any additional insight into this?
No, I mean, I don't know if it provided me with insight. I mean, like that whole dynamic, frankly, it was probably my least favorite part of the scene, because it was like, I feel like we need to put Peter and MJ together in this scene for it to like obviously both would be there to celebrate Harry Osborn's life. But then we also have this whole problematic storyline going on right now between Peter and MJ, and we have to acknowledge that, but like we don't want to derail what the story we're telling right now. So then it's like, we just kind of like, oh, well, like waving it away, kind of like, like hand waving it right now. Like, I don't know. That of everything in this scene that worked, that didn't work for me. And that, hence my crack in the synopsis, which was like, it's a long story. And I'm like, well, it's not, I don't know if it's a long story. It's just a story we have intentionally chosen not to tell in this book right now, and we'll get it when we're supposed to get it, whether it be after this storyline or 10 storylines from now. So,
well, the reason it doesn't seem like a terribly long story, as you're suggesting, is we're not like playing really with any clues here. You know, like it seems like when we find out about it, it's going to be like, oh, it's like this is just what happened. Like it doesn't seem to be really being sold as a mystery that we're meant to guess at, which like I appreciate in some ways, but it also makes it really hard to read a scene like this because we really don't know who these characters are and what they want and how they're interacting with each other. And so you don't really know like emotionally what to take. Like it's not adding anything because we don't even really know the base to add upon. So it's weird.
I mean, that's a great point. I mean, we have not gotten actual clues about any of this. It's all we know is that Peter made some kind of deal with Norman over the quote-unquote love of his life, which we are to assume is Mary Jane. But like how that, the cascading effects of that with Paul and children and everything else, we've received zero information on. And yeah, my assumption at this rate, 15 issues in, I mean, it will be 15 issues when we review our next issue, is when this information gets delivered to us, it's going to be an information dump. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I could be wrong, but then I don't know if that's good storytelling either, to all of a sudden start dropping clues in after really not doing any of that for the last 9 months or so, you know? So it's like, yeah, is it a long story, or just you're telling, you being Zeb Wells and the editorial team are telling a long story, and now is not the time for us to tell it in the confines of this comic book. So, yeah, it's kind of, yeah.
My fear and assumption is that, like, this is an attempt at a bold move of removing the Mary Jane romantic element from the equation. Right. I think earlier I thought it was about bringing them back together eventually, but the more the time goes on and the story doesn't seem to be focusing on this, it makes me think they didn't want to start the runoff with something that would be hugely controversial, even as much as this book has turned out to weirdly be controversial in a way that I don't necessarily agree with. But I don't know. I mean, until it ends, it's hard to really say one way or the other. So, like, this is the rare opportunity where I'm going to say I actually don't feel like speculating on it, because there is an interesting clue in 15 that we'll talk about when we talk about 15. But I think like this is like what they're intending to do here and how they're going about doing it. Like has ups and downs, and until it plays out, we won't really fully understand why those choices were made, and even then we might not understand why those choices were made. I can only go into this saying, like, I think that this is a smart writer in many instances, and I hope that the choice to do this was very much intentional in the way that so many other elements of this run have seemed intentional. So I'm like giving him the benefit of the doubt for now. Sure. But it is awkward as a reader to read it and not know, like, how we're supposed to feel about these things. Well, one thing that was very clear to me is how much I liked the kind of concluding scene of this issue, which is Chasm, or Ben Reilly, confronting Norman Osborn at Oscorp. Tell me about the scene. Think you like it as much as I did?
Yeah, I mean, this definitely had some rawness to it that I feel like I don't want to say has been missing from the Spider-Man comics, but like there was this kind of a what's the adjective I'm looking for? Like this was scary in its own way, you know what I mean? Because like you just like there was a part of me that was like when Ben shows up, I felt there was a real threat for Norman, and obviously it paid off as such, but even more so than I think how it paid off in the pages of this comic, where it was like, how far will he go? You know what I mean? Because it's and it goes back to my original point, like the motivation is just so simply there. It's Norman. I mean, like, put aside Norman's role in the Clone Saga, which is convoluted in its own right. In Peter Parker Spider-Man number 75, Norman kills Ben Reilly. He wipes him out. Like, it's there, it's done. It's kind of like, go back to that issue of, I don't know if it was like Superior Spider-Man Team Up or whatever, when it was like, Otto versus Kane, and he like goes ballistic on Kane. Like, it's right there, like the story is right there. You don't have to embellish it with anything else. Ben is, Ben, who's already in a really, bad state of mind, is confronting Norman, and like it was a kind of threat level I don't think I've experienced in reading a Spider-Man comic in a while, where you're like, oh man, like, how far will he go here? And what kind of damage is he going to do? So like having that kind of setup was great. Like, worked for me 100. Like, I was in. Like, I wanted to see. Like, if anything, I wanted to see more. I was kind of disappointed that it kind of ended as quickly as it did, because it was kind of like, Norman gets the Goblin gear on, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, I sabotage you, boom, and it was like, no, I want to. I wanted to see a little more of a conflict. I wanted to see more cat and mouse before Ben pulled out that trump card. So, but still, it was well executed scene for sure.
I think the ideas were meant to read that further conflict in the pages of Gold Goblin. Is where that's going to be playing out. But I enjoyed what we got here. But you're right. Seeing some more kind of like Ben exercising whatever new powers he has in a fight with this new Gold Goblin suit that we're still testing. Could have been really exciting in the pages here. But like I said, like you said, I thought this was a great scene. It's so funny that it took this long, because Ben has been back for almost 10 years now in the pages of this book, like since the clone conspiracy. I mean, maybe that's more like 7 years ago or whatever, but
right.
Sending him off to Las Vegas and that whole Peter David thing, it just seems like such a weird direction to have taken the character when stories like this exist. Like, I would read a whole series of Ben hunting down Norman and the Jackal for revenge on what they did to him, from the Clone Saga. Like, that seems to be just baked into the character,
Exactly.
If you're gonna do Dark Ben, that's the story I want to read. I don't want to read him fighting Peter. I want to see how far is a little bit unhinged Ben willing to go. And just to kind of any good scene where you're never quite sure who has the upper hand or the power in the scene is always good. Like, this scene did a really great job flipping back and forth between, who had the upper hand, and that's really exciting. And anytime I think you're reading superhero comics like this, and I thought Kubert did a really great job rendering this scene, and, in all the kind of exciting violence that it would be. And I mean, it's things like this that made me excited for Dark Web, which and I will admit, like I said at the top of the show, I don't think really has much to do with Dark Web more than it has to do with just smart character work. So I was praising Adam Kubert. What'd you think of his work in this issue? He's not someone we typically associate with Spider-Man, even though he's done a few books over the years.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when was the last time we got regular Kubert work? Was that the
Renew Your
Secret
Vows?
Wars? Yeah, I was saying, might have been Renew Your Vows. So,
I mean, you got that story and Astonishing Spider-Man and Wolverine, which I quite like. So, I mean, he's got some I would consider somewhat definitive takes on the character under his belt.
I mean, the book looked fine enough. I mean, I didn't love the visual stylings of it, but I've also been so all in on JR on this book for so it's every time we get a break from him, I'm like, you know what I mean? So I don't know. What did you do? You have more profound feedback than I do on this?
I mean, I think his stuff really fits in with the '90s kind of theming of this. It's dark and edgy, and I like his kind of flaming Limbo. I thought was a blast. I mean, hands down, he's a great X-Men artist. And he's been on our show, and will admit as much. He's not really a Spidey guy. So seeing him render the X-Men and Madeline Pryor with her flaming scythe and grand piano, it's I think he really excels in the non-Spidey Spider-Man-y visuals.
Right.
But in terms of bringing hell on earth stuff and some decent action, I tend to like Adam Kubert. I've liked his recent work on the Wolverine title. His Spidey's a little stiff, but it's not. It's like it's nothing I would like balk at. Like if he was a ongoing Spidey artist, I'd be pretty thrilled about that. So
I mean, his final image of Venom was fun. I thought,
yeah.
I mean, very, very 90s fied, but it was in a good way. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, and this is the Venom we're getting, whether we like it or not in this book. So,
yeah, I mean, if there's really only one like technical thing I could block, like knock Kubert on in this book is like I find his visual blocking of like dialogue and stuff kind of confusing. Like the characters flip, well, in film terms, it's screen direction, and so like they'll be on like opposite sides of the panel. There's like one moment that's really confusing in the Coffee Bean where they refer to a Mrs. Osborne, and it's I thought they were talking to Liz Allen, but like geographically that doesn't make sense given the scene. So I'm like, okay, is Harry's mother there? Like that we met in the Red Goblin story.
Okay,
I don't know.
I just took it as Liz, but yeah, I mean, I didn't even think about that. You're right. I was just assuming it was Liz, but I didn't even think about the blocking of it. That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, like if you go back and look, it doesn't match up to where Liz would be in the bar, and it's like okay, it was a little bit confusing, but overall, I liked his stuff. So, okay, Dark Web is officially started now. What do you think? Given a grade on this issue.
I mean, this might seem a little low, but I'm going to give it a C+. I enjoyed what I enjoyed, but I am still not that into this story, so I can't really go much further than that. But I don't know, like that. Yes, the two scenes we just discussed in the second half of this episode were legitimately good scenes. Where I think if they were just focused on that in the confines of a normal-sized ASM, it would have been higher. So, but there you go.
Yeah, and I could echo your sentiments completely. This is a B- for me. Like I am enjoying Dark Web in so as much as it's a Spider-Man book, and the rest of it I could take it or leave it. So
all right,
that's our kind of final word on this issue. So if you do find like this issue, our show entertaining and valuable, please consider supporting us. Recommend Amazing Spider Talk to a friend, and if you're able, it'd be great to have you as a member of our Patreon.
Yeah, we can only bring you this content with the support of our Patreon members, and we owe the show's success to every single one of them. We are constantly making exclusive content for our members, right, Dan?
Absolutely. So you can take $3.99. That's less than the price of this comic. And you can put it towards a month's subscription to support our show and start receiving our Patreon content. That way you'll hear all of our Patreon exclusive review podcasts on every new issue of Amazing Spider-Man the same week they come out, instead of waiting for them to arrive in your public podcasting feed. And plus, I've been doing these new Patreon exclusive live call-ins each week that I've been releasing as videos and as podcasts for our Patreon members. So they can join in, talk about the new issue, and hear what other members of the community thought about it. So if you don't want to just hear Mark and I talking about this, maybe you love Dark Web or you hate it with every fiber of your being, sign up for the Patreon, let us hear those thoughts, and we'll feature you on that exclusive feed. So I think that's pretty exciting. We did one for Dark Web already, and I had a blast joining in with some of our members.
That's awesome, Dan. And yeah, it sounds like those like live call-ins. It's like almost like a Twitter chat, right? But you won't like jump on there to talk about why you banned certain people and then disappear. Is that like kind of like the what you're doing with it? Or sorry,
well, it's funny because I think Elon got rid of the Twitter Spaces, so
okay.
It's operating in lieu of that. Absolutely.
All right. I didn't know that was. I forgot that was the actual name of it. That was what I was referring to. But so thank you for making my joke make sense. I appreciate it.
Well, Mark, what if someone were to contribute more than $3.99?
Oh, you mean you need me to keep reading the script? I'm sorry. Yes. If you contribute $10 a month, you gain access to exclusive artwork from famous Spider-Man artists commissioned exclusively for our members. This time, we've got a recreation of Web of Spider-Man #1, iconic cover of Black Suit Spider-Man, but this time joined by Daredevil, as illustrated by Juan Ferreira. Dan, this piece is so good. Juan tweeted it out. He tweeted it out. So, I mean, go follow him on Twitter if you want to see it. But, man, I cannot wait to get a piece of this in our mailbox. I know we just got some art from you with some other stuff, but, man, this Ferreira piece looks amazing.
I can't wait to send it out. I'll probably be sending it out early in the next new year. So, that's been the universal sentiment is people are like itching to get this, which is funny because it's very Daredevil oriented. But I think like every Spider-Man fan also loves Daredevil. I think that's a pretty safe bet.
Yeah, they go together. So anyway, plus every episode we release a new episode-specific desktop background created for us by Nick Cagnetti for our patrons to enjoy. And, I heard a rumor that Nick is hard at work for our new season coming up soon, Dan. So, those are going to be coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, more on that soon. But we do know it's a hard time for everybody, as it is for us too. So we appreciate anyone who just supports the show by listening to it and sharing it. But if you have the means, we would love to have you join our Patreon to support the continued existence of our show. Mark and I put a ton of hard work into Amazing Spider Talk and onto our Patreon content. So we know, that support would really help us continue and I think be very rewarding to you for, so a ton of entertainment. So there's a link in the description to this episode that'll guide you right there, or you can go to amazingspidertalk.com and there's a big Patreon button. So you can go and check out all we have to offer. So a special thank you to you, the listener, but also to all the members who already make this show possible by supporting our Patreon.
But alas, Dan, it's that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, as always, this episode was edited by Rick Coast. Our video version is available on YouTube and was edited by Alex Galucki. Our artwork comes handcrafted by artists Ron Friend, Sal Buscema, and Ray Sumser. Our theme songs were produced by Rylan Bojack, Tony Thaxton, and Spider-Madge, and our animated intro was created and performed by Josh Sutton. So, Mark, until I turn evil and get violent revenge on my own personal Norman Osborn from our annual series, what's our motto?
That could get you a police report, Dan. I don't know about that, but... With great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk.